Hey everybody, we just wanted to jump on here and answer some of the questions we weren't able to get to during our anxiety talk at New Life on bringing anxiety down to size. We have Dr. James Bixler here, Clark, and myself, Ethan Dahlberg. So we're going to start with the first question. The first question is, why did anxiety surpass depression in numbers?
Um, I think we don't know why we know what. I think is what it boils down to. I think we have the data that it's happening. Um, there's not a lot of studies as to why. That said, I think we can make some really educated guesses. Um, I think first and foremost, I think anxiety has always been really prevalent and underreported. And I think this is just as younger generations age and they're more comfortable with mental health, they have been more willing to sort of talk about its impact on their lives. I think there's really been a big focus on its correlation with suicide. And so people went out to really study anxiety. Um, and then I just think the whole practice of mindfulness kind of comes out of people wanting to um, cope with this anxiety. And it really is two sides of the same coin. I think our society probably generates more hyperarousal than hypoarousal. That's what I would say. Clark, you are muted.
I might just jump in and say that I think just the context that people are living in right now is more anxiety producing. And just one factor is societal change in general. Change tends to lead to greater symptoms of anxiety as people are adjusting, and that pace of change is increasingly accelerating. So I think we might be living in an increasingly anxious world.
Yeah, that's good. Good stuff.
Yeah.
How come sometimes squeezing someone while they're having an anxiety attack helps? And I think the key word here is sometimes.
Yeah, I think that's for sure the key word because I would say this is totally context based. For some people, that will actually increase their anxiety depending on why they're anxious. Um, I think that some of the things we talked about, the oxytocin and your hands and physical touch and comfort, are a big part of how people cope with being hyper aroused. We tend to seek comfort. And so when that's provided, there's kind of an intense relieving. I think the other thing is it's very similar to there are things released in our brains around pressure and some of those kinds of alternate nervous systems, not alternate nervous systems, but some of those kinds of nerves that receive pressure, heat, cold. Um, and I think they can like snap someone back into their body. Like when we get really hyper aroused, sometimes we get disassociative, meaning we disconnect from our bodies. And something like that for some people will like connect them to their body very quickly. And it just kind of snaps them back.
Yeah, and I think like what we said in the talk too, like we can do different things for anxiety, but not everything works. Like it's not a one size fit all, right? So squeezing somebody or somebody having a breathing technique or doing some type of coping skill might work for me, but it might not work for Clark. Or it might work for Clark, but not Jim. And so the three of us might deal with anxiety differently. And that might look very different as a whole for an individual person.
But particularly touching someone else,
Mm-hmm.
that can be fraught for people
Oh yeah.
with trauma and complexity and can make it worse. So I think the most important thing is know the person you're trying to help and what works for them
Yeah.
before you try to intervene.
Yep, it's good. Anything on that, Clark, or you good?
You're muted again, Clark. There we go.
Next question. Does the external stimuli suppress back brain? Please explain the science.
Wow.
I might start with just, I don't think our goal is to suppress the back brain. I think the idea, the back brain won't be suppressed. It's always going to be active. And so I think what we're really wanting to do is regulate that back brain. And I would also say it's probably a bit more about internal stimuli in many cases than external stimuli that helps to do that. And so some of the things we talked about in our workshop were kind of, in essence, talking to the back brain with the language that the back brain hears, and that is through the body. And a lot of those kinds of things we were talking about are really the helping to regulate by, helping to regulate the back brain. And a lot of times that was very much with internal, it's like with, focus on breathing slowly and interoception, or that is that paying attention to your body sensations. So.
Yeah, I guess I would add to that. The important piece to me of the regulating is we want in the proper time and place for our back brain to do its job. And so we don't want to suppress it. It does a lot more stuff than we even talked about because it's complicated. It has to do with performance, and it has to do with all kinds of things that we need and want and are pretty positive for us. We don't want it to have an outsized place in kind of a time where we need to be up here and over here, right? When we need to be able to consider our emotions and think our way through challenges in our lives. It's not super helpful for the access to our bodies, and it's not super helpful for those parts of our brains to be suppressed. And so it's more about getting those to light back up than it is like to turn the back brain off.
Yeah. How do we differentiate between self-care and being selfish?
I love this question. Actually, it boils down to me to self-care is with regard to other people, and selfish is without regard for other people. That doesn't mean that sometimes we don't make the healthiest choice we can around our self-care and that somehow that doesn't impact other people. Sometimes it will, and sometimes they won't be as big a fan of what we're choosing. But when we make those healthy choices with regard to other people, when we consider our relationships, our community, and we try to make the healthiest choice for us and those relationships and communities, that's not selfish. Even when sometimes it means I can't go to coffee with you because that's my time to do my art, or that's my time to go to the gym. I think when we do those things and we cut ourselves off from our relationships, our communities, that can be problematic. When it's without regard for other people or its impact for other people, that can be problematic. So that's kind of what I say around that.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, I don't know if there's anything else that can be said to that, but well, and I think too, when it comes to self-care, we really want to, I encourage clients, write that out. What does that look like for you? Is it something we do in community with others? Is it something that we have to do individually, right? If we're more introverted, it might be like, hey, I need my quiet time. and I need X amount of time to sit in the house or go somewhere and be by myself. And so I think it's just differentiating what does self-care look like to you. And if you feel selfish when you do that, asking yourself why, right? What is the impact? Why do I feel this way? Do I feel guilty? Do I feel shame? Like, what am I feeling when I get in that zone of doing my self-care, but then having this extra thing here, like a cloud over me?
Yeah, you can't give all the time and not receive. There are a lot of problems with that, not just for us, but for society in general. Um, having people in your life who you are a receiver from isn't just beneficial to you, it's beneficial to them. Like altruism and giving, like if everybody says, oh, I'm not going to be selfish, I'm only going to give, then we lose out on the reciprocity of altruism. And so we kind of have to think that way, and then we have to think about, at what point can I continue to be a good community member? At what point can I fill my roles in my relationships well and in a healthy way? And at what point is that starting to slip? Because I'm not paying attention to my body as a temple. I'm not paying attention to my relational health. I'm not paying attention to my emotions. I'm just acting to discharge the discomfort, not kind of intake what they have to say to me. But like self-care is a pretty complex idea that we have like condensed down into that phrase. Nope, Clark still muted.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah. We could even get into a little bit of a talk about healthy boundaries. And I think a lot of times when we don't have healthy boundaries, then the power of the request becomes so powerful that we can neglect that we have boundaries. And then anytime that the request isn't honored, it may feel to us like being selfish, when really it's it could really be a matter of needing to establish and practice some healthy boundaries in relationships.
Yeah, that's good.
That's good, Clark.
Next question. Do people ever live in the hyper arousal zone or just the can't calm down zone?
So what I tell people is this is one of the reasons that anxiety is sometimes easier to treat than depression. Because if you think about it, like your emotional, your zone of tolerance, if you think about that up and down, it's always easier to come down than come up. And sort of the gravity of your nervous system and body is going to wear itself out and tire itself out, and it will come down either in sleep. That's one of the reasons like insomnia is so dangerous. I'll just say that. But your body eventually is just going to be exhausted. And so you will come out of hyperarousal. Now that said, really, most people, I think, in our society live way too much time in that can't calm down zone before they pop up into dysregulated, is my observation. And that's highly correlated with a lot of really interesting stuff, longitudinal studies about death and cardiovascular health and long-term relationships and community and all of those things really are strongly correlated with being able to not be in that hyper arousal place as much. Yep. And not living in that can't calm down, because that actually turns out to be highly correlated with early death.
Yeah. So the next question, what causes a person to determine something that is not dangerous as threatening. I think this alludes to you, Clark, as far as when we were talking about the bear and the test.
Yeah, and I think it's, one of the things that we talked about is that those, those mechanisms, the back brain arousal mechanisms are not very discerning in terms of the nature of that threat. And so it isn't exactly that a person is consciously determining. When we think about determining, we're really thinking about kind of a front and side brain kind of an activity. That's that evaluation and assessment. So it's kind of when those are bypassed, that it's sort of the lack of determining, and it's really about it's about threat in general. And I'd say just another thing is if a person kind of has a habitual response to all kinds of threats, as with that arousal of that back brain, then those become more common. And so we talked about when brain cells fire together, they wire together, and so it makes those pathways, that activation pathways, just a lot more efficient, so they happen quicker, more easily. And so that's one of the reasons why it's so important to do something very consciously to regulate the back brain.
Yeah, I would say the back brain's purpose for threat is that it perceives consequence, right?
Yep.
And it's still getting information from your front and side brain. I mean, it does work both ways. And so when your front and side brain says, oh, if I fail this math test, I won't graduate high school. Like, that's a real consequence. And your back brain really just understands proximity. How close is that to me? How likely is that to happen? Like, how likely is this bad thing going to happen to us? That's kind of what it's interested in.
Next question. How much does our societal expectations create anxiety, i.e., so many harsh consequences, speeding, failing tests, getting somewhere on time, down to the second? I would just jump in right away and say it plays a lot, right? We talked about the change earlier. Clark was talking about the change from pre-COVID to now COVID, and how much change occurred in that and how much that can create anxiety and different things. But also, I think a lot of us operate on this uncommunicated perfect schedule, right? Got to have the kids to the line for school at this time, so that way I can make it to work on this time. And so we wake up already feeling a little anxious or have this expectation that we want to be met. And anything that kind of gets us off schedule, if you will, and maybe I haven't communicated to people this schedule, I instantly become anxious, and I spread that anxiousness to my kids, and I spread it to other people, and I take it into my workplace with me. And so it's being mindful of that, but also recognizing, like, as a society, yeah, we want everything now. And when that's slowed down, even the slightest bit, it can cause that friction.
Yeah, I would add to this, the scientist in me says, well, let's look at the data. And so let's look at human data and how we're going to do that. Well, we need some compare and contrast from other societies. And this is where it becomes really clear that our society in particular does really poorly at this. So when you look at societies that live differently, and then you look at the long-term impacts of that hyper arousal and that living in that can't calm down place, people whose societies encourage them to not live in those places as much, or don't push them, or have things about their society that tends to widen their windows of tolerance, they don't have those longer term impacts, and so as prevalently. And so, yeah, like, I think you just have to look at the data. I think we tend to be really Americentric, and this is one of those things that is just human centric. And so I think you have to look at the data from other cultures.
I might just jump in with, we also very much have a performance equals identity type of a culture, so that so who you are is what you do, and what you do is always subject to something less than perfect.
Yeah, that's good, Clark.
I've made it this far without letting myself feel, so why should I start trying to feel now? I would jump in on this personally. This is kind of me personally, in a sense. I've gotten a lot better over the years, but I think I had the same mindset coming into emotions in general, and a lot of that's based on childhood, for me personally, at least, and just the way that I was raised. I didn't see a whole lot of emotion being shown. And so when I started to open that, if you will, or turn this knob on just slightly, it was a new unfamiliar ground, but it was very beneficial. I like to tell people emotions are powerful, and they can do things to our physical body if we do not give them an outlet. For me personally, when this happens, I can get migraines, or I can get like this heavy feeling in the chest. Those kinds of things start to occur. But as soon as I release that emotion when it's there, I don't get those symptoms, right? I'm actually free. I feel less heavy. I feel like I'm able to be authentic, which is really important. And so personally, I would just say, like, yes, I was in the same mindset. I'm working myself out of that even still, and that's a daily thing. But yeah, I'll let y'all jump on that.
You're muted again, Clark.
Having trouble with that muting thing. But I would also say that a lot of times people might say, well, I don't really deal with emotions. And then every now and then they get a surprise, like they just sort of have an outburst, and it's like, I don't know where that came from. And, could be road rage, or, getting really angry with, and I think anger is a lot of times the way that comes out for people who are suppressing and not paying attention to emotions. And then, and analogy I have is kind of like holding a ball underwater. Yeah, you can hold that ball underwater. Takes a lot of energy to do that, but eventually you're going to slip, and that ball's going to pop out of the water, sometimes hit you in the nose.
Yeah.
And so there's really some risk to suppressing emotions. And I would just say, in addition to being useful, they're also part of what really adds to the richness of human experience. And so I think when we're not experiencing the emotions that are part of how we're made, I think we're missing a lot of the experience that's going on around us.
Well, and again, it's supposed to be a data channel. It's supposed to be a way that a very important way that we get information about the human experience. And so I always chuckle a little bit when people say, oh, well, I've gone through life without feeling or letting myself feel. I just think that's very unlikely, actually. Most of what people are talking about is like avoidance and behavioral suppression. And that's different. And so I think that's part of the reason that all the things that what both of you said apply really, really strongly is you're missing a large part of how to be a healthy human because you're trying to avoid some discomfort. And that's not super valuable.
Is there any level of anxiety that we can't fix?
Oh boy.
I might start with just the word fix.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, fix kind of implies that, well, a couple of things, that there's something broken and that it can be repaired to some perfect state. And I think both of those, symptoms of anxiety are part of what we naturally need. to be healthy. It's really about the level of those when they're getting in the way of living, living the life we want to live. So I think it's really about how can we find ways to regulate that so that we can have more the life that is worth living and that brings us some satisfaction and even hopefully some joy.
Yeah, and I would say, I mean, we could take this context any type of way, right? Because it just says, is there any level of it that we can't fix? And I would say, like you were just talking about regulating, right? If I'm already at a 10, that might be hard for me to come down from, right? But if I'm at a 5 or a 7, it might be easier for me to cope with. And so that's why I think we have various methods, various different things that we can do with anxiety in order to manage it. Now there's good stress, there's good anxiety, like we kind of talked about when we're needing that to kick in. But when we say, is there a level that we can't fix? Again, the context, this could be like now they're having a panic attack versus anxiety, and what does that look like? So I think we would need more context to this, but overall, I would agree with you, Clark, in the sense of we got to have something there. We got to have some type of coping skill to see if we can bring that down.
Yeah, the thing that I feel like I don't understand about this question maybe is, do we mean fix like, oh, when I'm really anxious, eventually I won't feel that way anymore? Yes, no feeling is forever. Like, especially in hyper arousal, you're gonna drift down. Your body's gonna make you.
Yeah.
I'll never feel that way again. That's a little more complicated.
Yeah.
Like, we can do all the things. We can widen your window of tolerance. We can do all the things. And sometimes life is just like that. And so dramatically decrease frequency, intensity, and duration. That's what I tell people. Anxiety is one of the most treatable things people come in for.
Yeah.
Now, unfortunately, it's really comorbid with things like autism and complex trauma and some of those other things. Like, the ultimate manifestation of some of those things is dissociative anxiety, right? Like, and so it is trickier depending on your context sometimes.
And as I read this question again just now, I'm wondering if maybe the person asking this question might have been thinking, okay, so you've talked about anxiety being treatable, but am I too broken as a person? Am I too much? And if that's kind of the spirit of this question, I would just say there's a lot of reason for hope. You're not too broken, and anxiety is treatable. And so have hope in that.
Yeah, I agree with that, Clark. That's good.
What if a job or responsibility requires me to function through anxiety and or stress?
It absolutely will. Yeah, just everyone. Yeah.
Yeah, I think about a lot of the
Yeah.
populations I serve who are first responders or complex secondary trauma people, trauma nurses, surgeons, EMTs, FBI agents, police officers, firefighters, military service personnel, like, you name it. Like, there are people whose jobs, I mean, I'll have them look at me and say, well, yeah, but like life or death is on the line and I have to be at this place when I work. I'm like, okay, that's true. That just makes you constructing your lifestyle around self-care that much more important. That makes being able to self-regulate at your job that much more important. It means knowing your limits is that much more important. It means growing connections outside of your work is that much more important in your brain. It just means you need to be way more attentive to this as a health issue for you. That's kind of what I tell the ladies and gentlemen that I work with in jobs like that.
And I would say, so even for people who aren't at those super high level stress jobs, there's going to be stress in pretty much everybody's job. And like Jim said, it's about that self-care, widening the window of tolerance. Those things that we do to widen that window of tolerance means that we're going to be better able to cope regardless of what comes up. So I think stress on the job or responsibility, taking care of people, kind of comes with the territory, and that's not necessarily bad, but we also talked about kind of completing that cycle. And one of the important pieces is the recovery. So there's the stress. We can handle that. We're actually made to handle stress. But what we need to do is then make sure we recover after that.
How do you control incessant worrying about the safety of your loved ones?
So this was one for me, and when I was in my 20s and all the way through, and even into my early 30s, that was something I did a lot. I worried about my wife and my children. Would they be okay? I kind of worried them from one place to another. And I think when I started to actually feel my feelings and become more aware, a lot of times what I would notice is that I could be actually could have a variety of different things contributing to my kind of level of anxiety or stress. But that was kind of the hook that I would land on. So sort of some generalized, almost free-floating anxiety, but it would land on being worried about my family. When I start doing a little bit better of taking care of that overall level of stress with a little better self-care, I started to notice that I wasn't ruminating or worrying as much about my family. So I think it sometimes could, there's a reasonable amount of concern. That's something that, we can think about and notice. But for me, at least, that sort of ongoing incessant worry was really more about a generalized sort of state of anxiety, kind of living in that difficulty calming down. It was more about that than actual danger to my family.
Yeah, I think the question I would have this person ask themselves is this about me or is this about my family? Where did I learn to perceive that I'm going to lose people if they're not in my presence? Where did I learn that? Where did I learn it? And if you learned it somewhere, if it's not this just kind of projected diffuse anxiety like Clark was talking about, that's a really good thing to get into therapy for.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And I think a lot of us do worry, like you said, Clark, that's more general of things, but also, I mean, even from a Christian perspective, right? We can pray, we can do different things, we can get in community with other people, we can talk to these people, right? If we're in a worrying state and it's like a mother's intuition, if you will, we can reach out with phone call, right? And talk to these people. But I think what Jim said is really important, asking yourself, what is this, right? Is this about me? Is it a control thing? Is it about them and it's just generalized? But yeah, it's a great thing. I know we all have seen clients on both sides of this. So next question is, if the side brain suffered a TBI that affected the emotional processing, can it go back to the way it was before the accident?
That's a really complicated question. That has a lot of factors. What caused the TBI? Where was the damage? What kind of damage was it? What I will tell you is, what I will tell the person who asked this question is, and particularly in the last 10 years, we have discovered a lot more things that help the brain recover from traumatic brain injuries, like physical brain injuries. We have discovered a lot more things that seem to impact positively the brain's capacity to recover. I won't get too into the neuroscience, but if there is structural damage, it's not about regrowing that, it's about rerouting the function a lot of times, because your brain is really good at that. Your brain will move one function of your brain to another part of the brain. And sometimes what you can do is figure out what's keeping that part of your brain from recovering and alleviate the pressure on the rest of your brain. And sometimes what it is really reintegrating that function into another part of your brain. Can I say, yes, for sure, people can recover? Again, that just depends on the nature of the brain injury. What I can tell you, it is way more likely that people will recover than it used to be.
So a relative of mine had a stroke and lost the use of one arm and hand, and quite a lot of speech. Couldn't speak very much at all. And many years ago, they might have just said, well, this is your new normal. But the therapies that she had, if this is probably a gross oversimplification, but in some ways it was practice those things that are really hard to do. And by practicing those things that are hard to do, your brain starts to make a way.
Yeah. With the amount of military in the community, are you going to do any programs centered around the military or reaching out to work with Tricare? As far as this goes, we are actively pursuing some military, as we all see different clients in our practice and our private practice, as well as far as Tricare goes. I mean, we do work with Tricare. Some of us do, not all of us do. But as far as planned, like speaking in military in that capacity, by all means, yes, we would be open to do that. Do we have anything currently set up? Not necessarily. We do have stuff in the works, but we don't actively have a training set up just for military population. Anything else y'all want to add to that?
No, I think this is a complex question. I probably do the most of this in terms of military work. It's a complex question because the military has a love-hate relationship with the mental health world. They just do, and it's complicated. And if you don't have experience navigating those waters, even doing something like a talk can sometimes do more harm than good if you're not careful. And so, yes, that is certainly something we all have a heart for. I currently do a lot of it. Would I like to do more? Absolutely. What I would say is, do the circumstances present us the opportunity to do that? Hopefully.
Yeah. And again, I think we all see quite a bit on an individual level overall, as far as clients go. How do bilateral breathing, object painting, etc. work with anti-anxiety meds? Can you use these with meds? Simple answer, yes. In the sense of, just like we can use, any of these techniques, that specifically these three can be worked with medication. Now, obviously, if you were nervous about that, you can always ask your provider if this is something you can do with your medication. But it's kind of like when people ask, like, there's like this stigma, if you will, that, well, you don't need therapy, you just need Jesus, right? You hear that saying of, well, you can have Jesus and therapy and it's still okay. So the same thing here, as we can have medication and use that, actively be engaged with medication if our provider has us on that, and we can also use our coping skills. They can often work well together.
And that's what the research says. Honestly, the best outcomes for severe clinical anxiety and depression is a combination of both. The best long-term longitudinal outcomes is a combination of both. That's what the research says.
Anything you want to add to that, Clark?
I would just say if the meds help to lower the arousal level to a point in a severe anxiety situation, it could be that's what will allow a person to be calm enough to even practice some of these skills and activities.
Yeah, it's a great point. Does it help if others ignore our anxiety or pay attention to it?
Oh, I'm going to give the classical psychology answer. That depends. I mean, what do you mean by attention? Like, there's all kinds of negative attention that is not super helpful. So here's what I would say. If you're in a relationship with someone who's encountering your anxiety, I think it's helpful when you're out of that hyperarousal zone to have some good conversations about it, to communicate what you think is helpful, for them to communicate with you what's helpful for you and them, and and have a real relational conversation about it. That's what I would say.
Yeah, I think it's helpful too in this scenario. If you're the partner of somebody that's dealing with high anxiety or even depression, we dip into that. It's good to get counseling or at least to have somebody to talk to about that. Because that can also be a position where it can be overwhelming to receive all of that, right? If I'm the one listening to this person and I'm paying attention to their anxiety and I'm helping them manage that, there's going to be a lot that comes on me. So I need to have good self-care. I need to have somebody to talk to. And we can't emotionally dump on each other back and forth, and not have somebody outside of this to be able to bounce some things off of.
And people shouldn't be the ultimate drug or treatment for anyone else. The best outcome for people with anxiety is to learn to manage, learn to do some of the things that we've talked about, to have a lifestyle that helps them manage their anxiety better. And your relationship with that person might be a really healthy part of that, but it shouldn't be the sum total of that.
What I think I might add is paying attention to it. If it kind of looks like I'm uncomfortable with you being anxious right now, I want to move you away from that. So I'm going to, kind of fix the situation. I'm going to help you right here. That is often not productive at all. And so a lot of times that when we're paying attention to someone else's feeling, a lot of times is with the intent to change it. And really, as Jim said, the person who needs to address that is the individual with the feeling. And sometimes being supportive is just being with somebody. So it kind of depends on what do we mean by paying attention. But I think a lot of times we are uncomfortable with other people's unpleasant feelings. And so sometimes it's just being okay with it.
How do you help kids not be so afraid of all the things that changed because of COVID, or even adults? All the changes in the last year have caused a lot of fear.
I'm going to make a referral here, actually. Last year during COVID, they did the Mental Health Summit through New Life online, and Clark and I did a talk called Coping Through Catastrophe. And if you can get your hands on that, that's a really good place to start. That's just a really good place to start, because we talked about that for an hour. I think this is an important, complicated issue for our kids, for adults, for people. But what I would say is we can do this. Like, the biggest thing is to have hope. Like, we can do this. I think sometimes fear is healthy. If it's paralyzing us, it's not so great. And I think that's probably what most people are referring to, is the paralyzation, the breaking down of relationships, the rifts in community, like these really negative kinds of impacts that COVID has had. And can we help with that? Absolutely. Um, can I talk about that in 3 minutes? Probably not. I'm trying to think of some highlights here, Clark. What do you?
Well, yeah, well, absolutely. There's a lot to it. A couple highlights, though, I would say um, is is to be mindful of limiting exposure. So, if we're in the news all the time, if all of our conversations are around this, then we're going to kind of fan those flames a bit. So I think limiting exposure. And then the other thing is, as adults, modeling some of those limits ourselves. So knowing when to stop doom scrolling, and to move away from that, and then also to model some emotional processing ourselves. Say, yeah, this makes me a little scared too, and this is some of the ways that I'm wanting to deal with it, and just allow your kids to express whatever some of those fears are, and to acknowledge, and you know to let them really be heard and seen in that.
Yeah, I think that's huge. I think a lot of times as parents and adults, when we deal with kids, I feel like, again, this is just my personal opinion. I feel like a lot of times we shut them down emotionally when we're in conversation, or if they say an emotion that they're experiencing, and we might not even do this intentionally, but we kind of like sidestep it and try to push them to like, but there's like, get over this because there's hope, or but there's this. And so instead of like pushing them forward, let them actually feel and have a good conversation around that to allow them to move forward. Right. We don't want to just skip over what they're actually feeling. And a lot of times, I think we all felt it as adults, what it did to us, what COVID did to us in the work sense. But kids, in the social sense and in the school sense, that affected them greatly. I've had so many clients come in that are young adults that have just talked about the sense of feeling alone. Right. There's this loneliness. They don't want to do therapy over a screen. They don't want to do school over a screen because it's just not the same. And so I think empathizing with them in that, and really, really thinking about what are the ways in which we can re-engage with them, and help them feel heard, like Clark said, loved, seen, and really getting on their level, but also as us as adults, like you said, modeling to them certain things, right? Because we need the same stuff.
Yeah, and I would think I would wrap this up by saying all of those things, absolutely. And I think it is important to instill hope. Like, um, we as humans, even as a American society, we have faced almost identical struggles, and we have overcome them and been okay. There's going to be change. That that is a hard lesson in catastrophe. It's hard. And so using all the things that Ethan and Clark talked about, getting down on their level, being okay with the emotions that come up around this level of radical kind of change. It doesn't happen very often in society, at least in our society. Um, but it does happen. And so during our lifetimes, we're going to experience something like this at least once or twice, in all likelihood. And so just being able to talk about that and be able to say, yes, this is really hard, and we're really good at this. We're really good at change. Let me model some of that for you. Let me let you have all the feelings because they are totally valid. This sucks. And there's hope.
What if you start to panic and hyperventilate?
People hate this answer. That depends. I recommend 3 things. Jump in a cold or hot shower. That's a very sensory experience that will often bring you back into your body in a way that regulates your breathing. Temperature changes, like open your freezer and stand in front of it. Like things that will be safe for your body, but also be kind of sensorily intense for your body, can be like healthy, safe things like that can really help people regulate their breathing. Some people will be like, breathe in a bag. Talk to your doctor before you do that, is what I'd say. Seek help, like let yourself seek. Often just that act of I need to get to someone will already start to regulate that a little bit. And then try to do something with your body. If you're having trouble breathing and you're standing up, lay down. If you're laying down and having trouble breathing, stand up. Like, effect some kind of change on your body. And you will often begin to regulate. I think the hardest part of the panic is the impairment that says, this isn't going to stop and I'm going to die. Rarely, and almost never for psychosomatic reasons does that ever happen. And so seek, because that's a primal thing that you can do. Like, try some sort of body sensory experience. If this is happening to you frequently, consult your doctor and get into therapy. Did I miss anything, guys?
The one thing I would add too is this might be a case where you add medication.
Might be, yes.
Might be a case where you dip into that, even if you were nervous about that, but just exploring your options, right? I know some people don't want to take medication, they're against that, or some people might be like, I'll only do medication and the medication isn't working for me. And so, right, we want to look at that and go, this might be one of those scenarios where we can introduce medication and coping skills. It's the only thing I would add to that. Got any pre-sleep ideas to help with deeper sleep? First thing that jumps in my mind is eliminate screen time, right? We know there's a lot of research on blue light and what that does to the brain and how much that can affect the brain. There's research on red light, different things. So I would say get curious and just look around. That's just some simple stuff. But one of the main things is like an hour before you go to bed, don't be in front of a screen. Just activate your brain. You guys want to jump in on some more of that?
Routine. That's what I tell people. Have a bedtime routine that includes knowing how your body transitions into rest. So for some people, it's like, hey, I go to the gym at 6:30 and I get back at 7:30 or 8, and then I maybe watch 30 minutes of TV, then I jump in the shower, then I have a bedtime routine, I do a mindful meditation, I put relaxing noises on. Like, find be curious and experimental, and then refine a routine. A routine for sleep is exceedingly helpful.
I would just chime in. There are just tons of great resources on this. So if you Google search sleep hygiene, you'll get a lot of different, and what's kind of nice, some of these are lists of different things, and they might just give you some ideas about categories. Like, oh, I didn't know that could affect my sleep. I'll take a look at that. So I think they can be really, really helpful just to kind of look through that as you're sort of thinking about what's a healthy routine for you. Great resources.
And I love that question because people don't think about their sleep nearly enough. If I could like wave a magic wand and fix one health issue almost that is super related to so many other things, it would be that people would sleep and sleep well.
My son had trauma at 2 years old. He draw what his fear looked like in color, then did sensory exercises to bring him present. What tools help now as a teen?
I mean, some of the same things. You just may have to recognize that his interests have probably changed. And so the ways he might appreciate expression or creativity or art may look different. I like to do music shifting exercises with teens a lot, meaning like, okay, make a playlist for me of a song that expresses like this feeling or emotion, then stop at it and talk about why. Now, let's play a song that is in a very different emotional space or place than that. Is in an emotional place of tranquility or peace or happiness or fun, or, and then play that and then tell me why that makes you feel that way when you hear it, right? Like, I kind of like to do an emotional, like a music shifting exercise. That's really fun. But again, know your teen. Like if his interest at 2 was in drawing and drawing in color, then of course that's an easy expressive tool for him. That might still be the case for him, but now he might want to draw an anime character or, like, or his favorite video game character or, and, or maybe he doesn't want to draw at all. Maybe he's a TikTok dancer. Like, know your kid, and meet them where their interests are at and be flexible enough to know that you can add a sensory exercise to those things to bring them to the present with almost anything that's expressive or interest based. That's what I would say. Like, be in relationship.
Yeah, I love that answer. And I'm going to try the music shifting thing. I haven't done that before.
Yeah, it's fun.
Yeah.
I always tell people you can mindfully pick your music and it is one of the few ways to tap directly into your mood. Like it will frequently shift your mood. Music is crazy powerful for people.
Yeah. Can you offer reassurance to people on medication? Big pharma is Satan is pretty harsh.
That's kind of harsh. Yeah.
I mean, yes, I suppose. I still have strong feelings about big pharma. Let me apologize for that. Because I don't want people to think that medication isn't useful. Sometimes it's a key component for a lot of different things. I am not medication opposed at all. The scientist in me cringes at big pharma because oftentimes we're not paying attention to the real science of medication and outcomes for people, like longitudinal outcomes. Most medication is symptom management.
Yeah.
It is not a cure. And so that can be critical to treating psychological, relational, emotional, mental health. But it is very unlikely to solve the problems. And so I think my problem with big pharma is that they have made a concerted effort to present their product as cure and minimize the whole holistic idea that often it's other things in concert with what they're doing that is helpful. And they're not really interested in that. And so I think we just have to recognize very, very clearly what they're going to push versus what is actually helpful for the long-term outcomes of mental health for people. They are a critical component. Medication is a critical component, but it's a component.
And I might just add, I think that there is stigma and associated shame with all kinds of challenges related to mental health. And I think for some people that, the psychotropic medication is, I'm putting something into my body that's going to change my brain. And I think for some people, there's some fear and some shame around that as well. And I think maybe one way to reassure folks that if someone is on medication and it is prescribed and part of a treatment that involves some therapy as well, to look at that as, as something that not something to be ashamed of, but rather to be grateful for.
Yeah, I like that, Clark. And I want this to be clear. I work with prescribers all the time in kind of a treatment team approach for my clients, and they are as critical or as important in that person's journey as their relationship with me. And so, I, yeah, that was probably a little harsh on my part. I I stand by the idea that I'm not a super big fan of the way big pharma operates.
And again, I think this question, like overall, we've been alluding to this throughout these questions, right? Medication, therapy, and coping skills can go together. They can coincide together. It's not one or the other. One might work better for you than the other, but it's not they can come together, right? As a team, like you just said, with prescribers, when we kind of come together and plan together, we're going to have a lot more strength behind it, right? And so we have multiple perspectives at play and just different things. And so I think it's super helpful. That's all of our questions that we have. We really appreciate everybody that came out to the talk. Hopefully these answers were helpful. Obviously, we could go on and on about some of these, and there's some that are very complex that we can get depth in. And so if you want to continue the conversation, we're going to have multiple trainings coming up in different areas. And so feel free to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, shoot us an email, subscribe to our website to see what trainings we have coming up. And so
What are the websites?
Oh yeah, cultivatecompetency.com. And same thing on Facebook, same thing on Instagram, TikTok. If you just search
Is it .com?
Yeah, .com. Yep.
.com. All right. Sweet.
Yep. And then if you just search us again on social media under Cultivate Competency, you'll see us come up. And again, look forward to multiple trainings that we'll be sharing here in the near future.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you.